Chapter 13. Meredith, have you lost your mind? You want to divorce me over such a trivial checkup? Charles asked, incredulously over the phone. Divorce her. Let her leave with nothing. My mother-in-law clamored on the other end. Leave with nothing. In your dreams. The money that's mine, your family won't miss a single penny. You should think about when you're going to pay back the $150 you borrowed from my relatives for the house renovation. My mother-in-law was taken aback for a moment. Wasn't it agreed that your family would take care of the renovation costs, and we'd provide the house for the marriage? Oh, now she's not pretending to be the refined city dweller in front of me. I kindly explained to my mother-in-law, didn't your son tell you? The $660 dowry I brought was a 3-year fixed deposit. Your family was in a hurry to renovate, so I borrowed $150 from relatives. It was your son who signed, not me. Besides, the renovation was for your family's house. You yourself said that if we divorced, I wouldn't get anything. If I'm to leave with nothing, then I can't take anything from the renovation. So, it's only reasonable for you hearts to pay back the borrowed money for the renovation, isn't it? Listening to the crazed argument between my mother-in-law and Charles on the phone, I hung up with satisfaction. Go ahead and fight. This time, I wanted to see if this mother and son could be as affectionate and filial as in the past, without me, the outsider, in the middle. Chapter 14. The following morning, I left Sophie with my mom and headed straight for the Civil Affairs Bureau with my lawyer. The Harts had already arrived. My mother-in-law was indeed reluctant to part with the $660 dowry I brought with me. As soon as we met, she demanded divorce but insisted that Sophie was the Harts' child, and they must have her custody. If I wanted Sophie's custody, I needed to return the $280 bride price to them. Moreover, the $660 dowry I brought into the Harts had to be split equally with Charles. Charles, the divorce is a matter between us two. Tell me, is this what you want as well? It's said that a real man doesn't live off his wife's family. This is the first time I've heard of a husband wanting to split his wife's dowry in the event of a divorce. Charles's face turned red with what I said. He turned around and snapped at his mother. Mom, can you leave me some dignity? That's the dowry that Meredith Lane's parents gave her. How can I shamelessly claim a share of it? Mother-in-law, the old lady who always liked to think of herself as noble city folk, finally dropped her act. The mother and son had a big fight right there in the Civil Affairs Bureau. Fine, you're so noble, you're so great. Why don't you go outside and ask around? Nowadays, who would marry you without a dowry of $1 or $2 million? With our family's situation, where would we get the money for you to marry again if we don't get a good share of the dowry? Anyway, I've said my piece. If we don't get half of the dowry, don't even think about getting a divorce. My mother-in-law insisted that Charles claim a share of my dowry. I just stood by with my arms crossed, quietly watching their performance. I admit, choosing the Civil Affairs Bureau's hall as the place to discuss our divorce agreement was deliberate. Given Charles's pride and the way he suffers in silence, I believe he could have planned my back to take a share of my dowry. But to admit in public, in front of so many people, that he's a man living off his wife's dowry? That would be more painful for him than death. As expected, the more my mother-in-law made a fuss, the uglier Charles's expression became. I added fuel to the fire. Charles, you should say less. Mom has a weak heart. She can't take the stress. As the younger generation, can't you give in a bit? These were the exact words Charles used to say to me. Now I return them to him and his mother. It's easy to spout nice words when advising others to be saints. But why can't you smile when it's your turn? Is it because you're naturally joyless? Hearing me say this, Charles instinctively yelled at his mother. If you're sick, go to the hospital. For decades, every time there's a quarrel, you clutch your chest and feign illness. Isn't that annoying? My mother-in-law's mouth gaped open like an oxygen-deprived goldfish. But this time, her son didn't rush over to help her as he used to. Then there was a thud as she slumped onto the chair. Charles, maybe you should check on your mom first. Charles looked disgusted. She's definitely faking again. After all these years, don't you know her? Don't bother with her. Hurry up and sign the divorce agreement and delete that video. Something was off. He was even willing to give up the dowry of over $660. Could it be that someone behind the scenes had promised Charles greater benefits to ensure that video was deleted? Chapter 15. Although I was curious about what benefits the person behind the scenes had promised Charles, I couldn't miss this opportunity. Taking advantage of my mother-in-law fainting and Charles urging me to delete the video, I immediately signed the divorce agreement. Charles watched as I deleted the video, which had already received 800 likes. He even recorded the process with his phone, likely sending it to his boss to show proof. I chuckled inwardly, holding my copy of the divorce agreement, and told Charles, "There's a 1-month cooling off period for the divorce. I hope you'll keep your word and not back out. If you renege on the agreement and don't proceed with the divorce formalities in a month, don't blame me for posting the video again." Charles's expression changed, as if he wanted to say something. At that moment, I suddenly saw my mother-in-law slumped in the hall chair. "You like to fake illness and use moral coercion, right? This time, I'll let you reap what you sow." Chapter 16. With the divorce agreement in hand, I began to argue with Charles about the visitation schedule for Sophie. I insisted that his family could only visit once a month. Charles, of course, disagreed. I was adamant, and we bickered back and forth in the hall. Don't blame me for being ruthless. In my previous life, this wicked old woman knew that the kindergarten was responsible for Sophie's death. Yet, she never thought about seeking justice for my poor daughter. She was Sophie's biological grandmother, after all. Who would have thought? What goes around comes around. In this life, I will let this wicked old woman taste the bitterness of waiting for death alone. The hall was bustling with people, some of whom were arguing over divorce agreements just like us. No one noticed an old lady slumped in a chair, who might as well have been asleep to the unknowing eye. After arguing for over an hour, I figured the old woman would have to spend a year or so in the hospital if she wasn't dead. Pretending to compromise, I tentatively agreed with Charles to let him visit Sophie once a week and added this to the agreement. After securing the agreement, I left with my lawyer. As I reached the door, Charles's panicked cry finally came from behind. Mom, what's wrong with you? Wake up, boy." Chapter 17. I had not expected that 1 hour of delay would have such an effective result. I had barely gotten home when I received a call from Charles. "Mom's not going to make it. Hurry and bring Sophie to the hospital so she can see her grandmother one last time." Despite rushing, I was too late. My mother-in-law suffered a sudden cerebral hemorrhage, and because it was not discovered in time, we missed the optimal window for treatment, leading to brain death. Seeing Charles squatting outside the operating room, holding his head in utter despair, I felt an extreme satisfaction. But that wasn't enough. "Charles, even though Mom has passed away, as her children, we must think about her afterlife. Why don't you sign an organ donation consent form for her? Donating her organs to those in need would be a way to do good deeds in her name." Charles suddenly stood up, his eyes red with anger, and glared at me. "Meredith Lane, you are too cruel. How did Mom ever wrong you? Why can't you even let her rest in peace after death? Organ donation? Do you want her to be dismembered after death?" I looked at him with a wounded expression. "Charles, you've misunderstood me. I'm also thinking of Mom's best interests. Have you forgotten? Didn't Mom always teach us to have a spirit of sacrifice?" Charles choked up, giving me a fierce glare. In the end, he did not agree to donate the usable organs from my mother-in-law's body, selling off his own daughter's organs so easily. Yet he can't bear to part with his mother's? Watching Charles in his profound grief, I felt nothing but disgust. In my last life, when my Sophie died tragically, this mother and son must have been overjoyed, right? A disliked child who cost them money was gone, and they made over $1 million. Did they ever shed a single tear for my Sophie? But no matter, in this life, it's their turn to weep.